moving right now beyond Maidan and beyond Ukraine itself to more international stage, and this would be a question to Olena. During the month of December, I know, Olena, that you work on with various people in Ukraine on the list of those who were responsible for violent crackdown on peaceful student protests on November 30th. And eventually more than 100 people from government, security forces, and judiciary and prosecutors' offices, they were included on that list. And the list was shared with various state officials from the EU and United States. And my question is, how did you see the role played by the international community and Western governments after November 30th crackdown during the month of December and January? What did Ukrainian activists seek that time from the international community, and what response did they receive?
Yeah, the push from the activists on the ground was definitely to ask the EU and the United States for sanctions. They were begging for those sanctions because they hoped that it would help to stop the regime from hurting them, that it would deter the pillars of the regime from using violence. And many activists, like even here in the United States, they were very determined about sanctions, and they wanted Yanukovych family and Yanukovych to get on the list immediately. But what I was involved in was a more targeted effort that would deter the violence rather than punish it. So by targeting people in the regime that are probably less important, you show the example to more important people that the West is serious about sanctions, and then you hope that more important people will think twice before following an illegitimate order, or they would decide to defect. And so that was the idea. And there were a lot of lists of those people who were supposed to be targeted, around 100 names, as you said, because we were looking not only at people in Kiev, but also at people who were in the regions, like judges, for example, who prohibited protests, like local law enforcement and local authorities like mayors of Kharkiv, for example, who were involved in human rights violations. But unfortunately, as you know, both the United States and the EU, they were essentially waiting till the last moment with this application of sanctions. Maybe they do not believe that you can use sanctions not to punish but to deter. And so I would say that they used sanctions to punish, because they used sanctions already when it was clear that the regime is almost, it was gone. It was after 100 people were killed. And one interesting story that I would like to speak about is that when I was talking to different decision makers here in the United States after November 30th, and I was telling them, how many people were beaten, and we never had such violence in Ukraine before, when massively people would be physically abused during a sit-in protest, when they were absolutely non-violent students.
And that was on November 30th.
Yes, it was on November 30th. It was this moment that triggered a larger protest in Ukraine that Olga was talking about. So when I was talking about that, I was always hearing similar responses like, do you know what's going on around the world? Do you know about mass atrocities in Syria? Nobody was even killed, things like that. And I was,
I mean, no one was killed in Ukraine.
Yeah, nobody was killed in Ukraine. And then after, in January, we had 3 people killed. Still, they did not introduce sanctions. And they introduced only after 100 people were killed. So I think it only shows the idea of policymakers that sanctions, they don't like sanctions because sanctions narrow policy options for them. and they believe that sanctions can be counterproductive, but my opinion is that when you use them wisely, you can use them as a deterrence.